given the incredible commercialization of architecture, its commodification, this incredible desire and search for, let's say, novelty that's basically driven by global capital, especially in environments like Asia.
Yes.
How do you begin to produce architecture that is meaningful and relevant, to its context? And how do you begin to understand what context is finally? Because in the most, let's say, traditional sense, you would normally look at context in terms of, climate, history, and I think in a sense, especially in places like Asia, that led to a lot of movements from, let's say, critical regionalism, I think being one of the key ones, but which finally failed because in a certain sense, critical regionalism could not provide a framework that could actually address just the diverse conditions, both economic, social, cultural, that arise in a kind of complex, kind of post-colonial society. This kind of post-colonial ambivalence about the value of history. It's only maybe 10 or 15 years back that Bombay actually put in place a set of heritage conservation guidelines. But one is where you then treat history as a historical artifact that exists in the city. But how do these buildings still maybe provide clues as to how we can think about basically city form or ideas that are still relevant today for new architecture? And I think what was very interesting about the Tote, of course, was that it is built within the racecourse, which is one of the colonial artifacts in the city in terms of this kind of grand event of horse racing. Can we look at basically Bombay's colonial history in a way that is interesting, that still provides some kind of a link to that history, but allows us to create something that is actually new? The truss that you see in the actual design is actually the reworking of a colonial Victorian truss, which you will find everywhere in the city. In Crawford Market, absolutely.
Yeah,
in that sense, the idea of the colonial truss, the steel truss, is reinvented in this very poetic manner. And in that sense, I think one of the nicest things that somebody actually said about the Tote when they walked in was, it feels like this was always there. For me, that was very interesting because it kind of tapped into this kind of subconscious memory, this kind of collective memory, and in that sense of familiarity. Because what you often see is, even when it comes to conservation or basically heritage buildings, it's the extreme of basically preservation or erasure. Absolutely nothing in between. And there is no public imagination about how one can actually reuse and bring this fabric back into the city in a meaningful way. So that's what I mean by this colonial ambivalence. Because it's about what is the value. If it's not worthy of preservation, erase it. You also see the value in that conservatism. Because it still basically preserves urban form and creates, I think, new kinds of hybrids that struggle or attempt to address exactly that same question. How do you retain a certain kind of historical idea or a certain kind of historical fabric, but still allow for transformations to kind of happen within that? I think it's the quality and the nature of that dialogue that actually leads to typological transformation. I think for us it has been a demonstration through practice, dealing with either let's say political conflicts or cultural conflicts. To me, that whole idea of our colonial history, it's also problematized because of its inherent politics. To be able to say that colonial architecture is relevant is a political statement.